This is the 7th session in the 8-part series on the 7 Factors of Enlightenment. In this session, I'll continue our discussion on samadhi, continue from last time, focusing on a particular manifestation of samadhi called jhana. In the Pali texts, there are 4 jhanas described, which are 4 stages of deeper states of samadhi. The word jhana really just means meditate or to meditate. And in a few places in the Pali text, it actually refers to some wrong types of meditation that are unhelpful or even harmful. There's a story when the Buddha, in his early days of his spiritual quest, had undertaken some severe ascetic practices. One of them was to hold his breath for a long time. And of course, he realized that it's not only not helpful, but it could actually be harmful. And it was described as a breathingless jhana, and explicitly as a description of a wrong jhana. So that appears a few times, but almost all the times that the term jhana is used is in reference to the 4 jhanas. So I want to go through the description of what the jhanas are, and then a little bit about why they're important and how they can vary from person to person and how they can relate to our meditation practice. It turns out, just as there's more than one way an undistracted mind can unfold, we discussed that last time, there's a range of experiences in jhana. And in fact, jhana is part of a list of what's called the 4 imponderables. So there's a list given, and it says there are, in the Pali text, it's ascribed to the Buddha saying this. We don't know, but according to tradition, there are 4 imponderables. And the first is, how did existence come into being? How did existence come into existence? Well, you can see you can't figure that out. The idea with the 4 imponderables is not only can you not figure it out, but if you tried to, you just kind of get yourself tangled up in a logical, philosophical mess. It's not going to help you in for your Dharma practice. So that's a big question, right? How did existence even come to be? They said, just don't go there. Another imponderable is the workings of karma. If you believe in the traditional Buddhist cosmology, which says that we've had innumerable lifetimes in all different forms and all different ways, and through all of that we take many actions, which gives rise to karma. I'm not going to get into a big discussion of karma. Then it's been so much that you couldn't figure out the tangle of karma. So if something were to happen to you, you can't say, oh, this happened to you because you must have done something in the past. That's actually not even the correct understanding of karma. Karma is meant to help inform that our actions have consequences. So let's pay attention to act in ways that create less and less suffering in the world and create more well-being, more happiness. So we create more wholesome and less unwholesome actions. That's the way to understand karma, not to try to look to some past explanation of what might be happening now. So there's a second imponderable. Third imponderable is the mind of a Buddha. And the 4th imponderable is the range of experiences possible in jhana. So that goes to show that what can happen is quite varied. It's the world, the landscape of meditative experiences, and certainly in jhana, is vast. And what that means is it's not just one way on what your experience is supposed to be. We'll get into that in just a little bit. What we want to do is sometimes certain teachers will have a very fixed idea of the kind of experiences that are supposed to arise, and certain experiences are not supposed to arise. And that's fine. That's their system. And it's perfectly fine for someone to say, if you're going to meditate or practice with me, this is my system, and then you have to decide if you want to practice in that way. I come from a different place where I feel like we need to validate really the range of how our spiritual path reveals itself to us, and it's not just one way. But so it's a big world. Let me start by reading the definition of jhana. So jhana, there's a set definition in the Pali text that's always used, the same words, and there's one sentence given for each of the 4 jhanas. Before we do that, let me back up and then I'll come to read this. I wanted to mention one other thing. If you're familiar with the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, the 8th final element of the Eightfold Path is samadhi, which is what we're just talking about. And it is explicitly defined as the 4 jhanas. So you can see that jhana is considered to have quite a level of importance. I would like to offer, that's fine, that is what the definition is. It says it is the 4 jhanas, but I find what's more useful is to think of the 4 jhanas as the culmination of right samadhi, but actually to view any level of samadhi as right samadhi, as long as it's accompanied by the other elements of the Eightfold Path: right understanding, right intention, right view, morality, right effort, right mindfulness. If we bring in these other wholesome elements, then we should appreciate whatever level of samadhi we have, and knowing we can aim or aspire towards the states of jhana. But again, the texts do say right samadhi is the 4 jhanas, and we can see it's bringing in quite a level of importance. So let me read the definition of the first jhana we'll start with. And by the way, as I read this, if you have maybe read the definition of jhana from other sources, this is my own translation. There are plenty of sources out there for people who are great Pali and Sanskrit scholars, know a lot more than I do. Sometimes they've made stylistic choices. I'm sure they had good reasons for it, but which can steer the meaning away from the literal meaning of the words. And I tried to stay in my definition as close to the literal meaning as possible. I'm not... I don't want to make a value judgment of who's right or wrong. And in fact, as we talk about these, you'll see I'll name a few of the different ways that these terms are understood. Again, it's not just one way. So let's read the first jhana. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, you enter and abide in the first jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, and accompanied by thought and examination. Let me read it one more time. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, you enter and abide in the first jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, and accompanied by thought and examination. Is that clear? No, it's not clear. What does that mean? We'll tease it apart in just a moment, but you can see there are quite a range of meditative experiences that can be very, very different, but match these words. And by definition, any meditative state that can match these words is jhana. So not only is it not just one way, there have been, sometimes people joke, but I don't know if it's that much of a joke, what we call jhana wars. People can get very opinionated and very attached to, my jhana, and this is what's real jhana, what you're talking about is not real jhana. And that's okay if someone wants to, again, if someone's teaching in that style, you want to follow that, that's fine. You can follow that path. They're being very clear, that they're being very specific. But it turns out that no matter how one teaches jhana, it will match for some people, but for other people, because it's going to unfold in different ways, because we're all different, there are other manifestations of jhana. when we're done here, I'll give you my own definition of jhana that I think is a very more inclusive. But again, other people will say something different. So let's take a look at what's a range of understandings here. First jhana definition begins with quite secluded from sensual pleasures. What do we mean by that? It just means creating supportive conditions to help us meditate. You need to, if we're caught up in a lot of sensual desires, that's not so conducive for the mind to settle. So, and to deepen. So, at least while we're practicing, we want to be able to set aside those. We want to seclude ourselves from sensual pleasures. And similarly, the next, secluded from unwholesome states. That's referring to setting aside, at least for the time being, what are called the hindrances. I'll just spend just briefly on this. It's not part of the 7 factors, but it is coming into play here. So I'll just name them. There's actually a list of 5 hindrances that are given. And there are ways in which our mind can get entangled and caught up and stirred up. So one of them is the wanting mind, desire. The euphemism that's used is greed, but it stands for all of wanting, desiring, grasping after things. That's not so, when it's strong, it's not conducive to settling the mind. The flip side of that is the euphemism is hatred, which is aversion, wanting to get away from something or get something unpleasant away from us, right? So wanting, not wanting. Another one is called sloth and torpor. It's where you can feel the feeling of those words. That your body or your mind, it's too dull, too sleepy, right? So as I talked about in one of the previous sessions on the factor of energy, we want to find ways to help bring the energy up more balanced. On the other side, you can be the energy's too high. They call it restlessness and remorse, ways in which in the body or in the mind we're too stirred up. We want to find ways to bring it down. And the 5th hindrance is called doubt. And it's considered a hindrance because it's doubt about our own ability to practice. Does the practice work? Can I do it? Undermines our trust in ourselves, learning to listen to ourselves. There's lots of manifestations of doubt. So you can see that just like with sensual pleasures, we want to be able to find a way, at least for now, to set aside the hindrances, let ourselves, what will support us just to be more still, more quiet, not so caught up in all of that. And then it just says it doesn't tell you how, but it says you enter into the first jhana. And it says it's accompanied by 4 qualities: rapture and pleasure, born of seclusion. The born of seclusion means just what we're just saying. Because we secluded ourselves from these hindrances, now we can open up to these deeper states. Rapture, pleasure, and what's called thought and examination. Well, the rapture is the word, that's the translation I used here for piti, which we discussed last time, so I won't go into what that is. And pleasure is another Pali word, sukha, which is generally translated as happiness or pleasure. So you can see that sukha has a similar feel to piti, but it's just not as strong, right? Piti was more bliss and rapture, sukha more pleasure, pleasant, and happiness. Now, a lot of teachers think piti and sukha are 2 different things. I'm probably somewhat of an outlier. I don't view them as separate things. I think it's really just a way of talking about a continuum of pleasant, whether it's energies or just feelings. And when it's stronger, it's more of a piti, and then it's on a continuum, it smooths out. It's more what we call sukha, pleasure or happiness. Different ways to think about it. So there's that piti and sukha, rapture and pleasure. And then now this term thought and examination. The terms in Pali that I've translated here are vitaka, vichara. And these are among the most problematic terms in all of the Pali texts to arrive at what was the originally intended meaning. Now, vitaka, vichara they're a pair. They should be thought of as a phrase paired together. And let me read you a few different translations that I found from different sources so you can get an idea of the range of ways people are trying to come to their understanding of the vitaka vichara. reflection and investigation, thinking and pondering, thought and examination, which the way I just used it. So those are one. And there's another way that it's translated, connecting and sustaining, directed thought and evaluation, initial and sustained mental application. That has a different feeling. So these are in two kinds of understandings. One is the act of connecting your awareness, your attention, and sustaining it on your meditation object. And the other is other mental activities, just acknowledging this, whether it's thinking, reflecting, different kinds of just mental activities. So people teach this in different ways. You can see it's another way in which it's not one way that jhana is understood. There always is some aspect of connecting and sustaining your awareness, right? That's what we're doing if you work with your breath or whatever meditation practice you're doing. You are directing your attention to connect with, say, the breath and sustain it there, the best you can. That's what we're developing. So the connecting and sustaining part's there. Some people would say when you're in the first jhana, there's no thinking. But others will say, no, jhana can have thinking, and it's a thought and examination or reflection aspect. So again, different definitions of what people will say entails jhana. So that gives you an idea that a lot of different meditative states can match these words, and it's not like anyone's right or wrong. They're just different states that we can call jhana. Elsewhere in the suttas, not contained in these jhana definitions, is a list of 5 factors which are called the 5 jhana factors. 4 of those factors are what we just had, the piti, sukha, vitaka, vichara. And a 5th factor in Pali is ekaggata. The eka, it means one, which is translated variously as one-pointedness, unification of mind, sometimes singleness of mind. If you recall from our last session, I talked about how an undistracted mind can manifest. One of the ways it can manifest was what I called exclusive samadhi, and we use the term one-pointed. You're undistracted, but more narrowly focused. This same term, ekaggata, I translated as unification of mind if it was more the second kind of undistractedness, which was more of an open, inclusive awareness. I call that unification of mind, same term. In whatever way we understand it, the mind is come to a stillness. It's kind of an unmoving presence. And both of these ways, one's not better than the other. I should also say that when you're in a jhana, well, let me back up for a moment. I use the term the mind. I know I'm being a little sloppy with that. I think I mentioned this last time when I say the mind, because I don't know what the mind, what is the mind? That's a big topic. But so hopefully the idea at least makes sense that the mind comes to stillness, right? I talked about that last time. So here we are, right here, this ekaggata, that's the stillness. But even though that ekaggata, the stillness, the unmoving, the one-pointedness can be strong, there's another part of the mind that can still move, and we can direct our attention to know what's going on. I'll say it in using like it's a verbal process, but it doesn't have to be verbal. It can be just a feeling. It's kind of like, what's this? Or let me take a look at that. You can direct, let me see what's going on here. What's happening over there? So there's both the part of the mind unmoving and still an ability of a part to kind of direct the attention. So that if you haven't experienced it, that may not make sense, but when it happens, it'll be clear. Okay, so there's the first jhana. Let's go on now to, and I'll read again the definition of the second jhana. With the stilling of thought and examination, you enter and abide in the second jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure born of concentration and accompanied by inner composure and singleness of mind without thought and examination. I'll read it again. With the stilling of thought and examination, you enter and abide in the second jhana, which is characterized by rapture and pleasure born of concentration and it's accompanied by inner composure and singleness of mind without thought and examination. So that gives you an idea of, it's a little bit of a different feeling. So first, the stilling of thought and examination. In whatever way we understand Vitaka Vichara, whether it's directing and sustaining or some kind of other thought process, that's dropped away. Meaning in the second jhana, there could be controversy of does the first jhana have thinking? By the second jhana, there's no discursive thinking. You still have that part of the mind that can kind of direct and want to know what's happening, okay? So also, if you think of Vitaka Vichara as connecting and sustaining, it also drops away because you don't need that activity of connecting and sustaining because of you're so deep now, you just are connected and sustained. So that's dropped away, but it still has the piti and the sukha, the rapture and pleasure. And then it added two more elements, inner composure and singleness of mind. And that's just, and then it says, it emphasizes without thought and examination. That's just to emphasize the inner composure. We've really come, it's really even more deep. The tranquility is, this is the other factor, tranquility is stronger. And we're really more settled, steady, and it's emphasizing the singleness of mind again. So that's the second jhana. And then now we'll take a look at the third jhana. With the fading away of rapture, you abide in equanimity. Mindful and clearly aware, feeling pleasure with the body, you enter and abide in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, he abides in pleasure. Let me repeat that. With the fading away of rapture, you abide in equanimity, mindful and clearly aware. Feeling pleasure with the body, you enter and abide in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, you abide in pleasure. Okay. So fading away of rapture, that piti, however you experience, has dropped away. Things have settled out. But you abide in equanimity. So it's emphasizing now this quality of equanimity, which is actually the seventh and final factor of the eightfold, of the seven factors. You're already getting that stronger in equanimity. And mindful and clearly aware. We talked about that under when we did the second factor on Dhammavichaya investigation. And I brought in this term sampajanya, which is the clear awareness. Sometimes mindfulness and clear awareness are thought about to go together. I won't go through that again since we talked about that in this third session. But now it's emphasizing that your mindfulness, your clear knowing, your discernment, your clear awareness is so much heightened now just by fact of being so present. You're abiding in equanimity. And it says, you abide in the third jhana, of which the noble ones declare, equanimous and mindful, you abide in pleasure, the sukha. So they use this word pleasure. I translate sukha, pleasure when I'm talking about the body, happiness when I'm talking about mental, but it's emphasizing that you're just in this real steadiness with a lighter, pleasant mindfulness and clear awareness. Fourth jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, you enter and abide in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness and equanimity. I'll say that again. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, you enter and abide in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness and equanimity. So the abandoning of pleasure and pain, that was more a physical thing. Remember, things dropped away more back in the third jhana. So we don't feel, things are so smoothed out in the body. You get in these states and you can sit in meditation for a long time because you're not actually experiencing pain. You might feel vibration. The body feels like it's a body of light. There can be a lot of things that happen, but you've pleasure and pain have gone, and joy and grief, which are more mental, have dropped away. So you're just in this steady presence. you enter into in the fourth jhana, which, and it emphasizes again, has neither pain nor pleasure, so you're not feeling anything like that, and a purity of mindfulness and equanimity. So just a presence, and they really tend to emphasize just that awareness. I just want to bring one more piece in that I, just because of time, I didn't bring in. For each of these four jhanas, in addition to the definition, there's a simile that's given that tries to explain the state more. And I don't want to go back on the first three jhanas and say that. You can find the jhana similes easily. But I do want to bring in the fourth jhana simile. So it gives the definition, and it says, you sit pervading your body with a pure, bright mind, so there's no part of the whole body unpervaded by a pure, bright mind. Just as though you were sitting covered from head to foot with a white cloth, so that there would be no part of your whole body not covered by the white cloth. So too you sit pervading your body with a pure, bright mind, so there's no part of your whole body unpervaded by the pure, bright mind. So that gives you an idea, just in this place of this really kind of amazing awareness, consciousness, clarity. And you can see, if you've developed the kind of undistractedness that I'd call unification in mind, inclusive, you don't, what I said earlier, what comes from doing insight type practices is right there. Your mindfulness and your awareness is so clear and present. Things have settled out so much that there's probably not a lot going on to do insight with or to investigate. But you don't need much because things are so subtle then. So that gives you a basic idea about these states. Again, they're so powerful that if you then wanted to, some people, once you attain jhana, want to turn your attention to do various forms of insight practices. I won't try to name them there. Connect with, anyway, different, there's a whole range of ways insight is taught, and that's good. A whole nother way to approach is you don't have to do anything. Just by being in the jhana, look how it emphasizes equanimity so much. Not just when you're in the state of jhana, but it's sort of like, I used to think of it like if you have an oven that can get dirty, and sometimes ovens have what's called a self-cleaning mode, where you turn the heat up very, very hot, and whatever dirt or grime or oil was on the sides, it just gets burnt off into ash, and you're kind of cleaned out. It's not just like that, but in a way, jhana kind of cleans us out in that way. And it may not feel like it's necessarily even connected to insight. Again, it can, but it may be just by just virtue of attaining these states, it really kind of brings us to live even in the rest of our daily lives through more of a place of equanimity. So we can see there's quite a power in attaining any states of samadhi, but certainly these deeper states of jhana.